I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. But the events on Mirror Lane changed everything for me. I moved there for the quiet, the charm, and the sense of a small, close-knit community. What I found was a nightmare that still haunts me. It started subtly. Little things at first. Reflections in mirrors and windows seemed off, like a trick of the light. I would catch glimpses of my neighbors in my bathroom mirror, doing things that didn't quite make sense. I chalked it up to my imagination, fatigue from long work hours, perhaps. But then, the incidents became impossible to ignore. One evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw Mrs. Hargrove, the elderly lady from across the street, reflected in my bathroom mirror. She was standing in her kitchen, her expression one of intense concentration. The scene shifted, and I saw her arguing with someone who wasn't there. Her lips moved in silent fury, tears streaming down her face. The next day, she didn't remember any of it. She looked at me like I was crazy when I asked her about it. As days passed, the reflections grew more frequent and bizarre. I saw Mr. Peterson, the quiet librarian, reflected in my living room window, scribbling furiously in a journal, surrounded by stacks of old, dusty books. His face was a mask of despair. I saw children playing in my hallway mirror, children who had never lived on Mirror Lane, their laughter echoing eerily in my ears. The breaking point came one night when I saw my own reflection. But it wasn't me. It was a version of me, trapped and screaming silently, eyes wide with terror. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. The image vanished, but the terror lingered. I knew then that something was deeply wrong. I began talking to my neighbors, cautiously at first, trying to gauge if they were experiencing the same things. To my surprise, they were. Mrs. Hargrove confessed she had seen me crying in her mirror, though she didn't know why. Mr. Peterson admitted he saw strange, cryptic messages written on his windows, messages he couldn't understand but felt compelled to decode. We all realized we were living each other's lives through these reflections, sharing each other's pain, fears, and secrets. We gathered at Mr. Peterson's house one night, all of us desperate for answers. The air was thick with unease, our breaths shallow and tense. Mr. Peterson, always the rational one, proposed a theory. He had been piecing together clues from the reflections and the messages. He showed us his journal, filled with notes and diagrams. He believed Mirror Lane was some sort of limbo, a place where souls with unresolved conflicts were trapped. He explained how the cryptic messages and visions seemed to point to unresolved issues from our past lives. It all started making a twisted kind of sense. He pointed out that none of us could remember how we had arrived on Mirror Lane, nor could we leave. We were all dead, he said, each of us with unfinished business. The only way to move on was to resolve someone else's conflict. It sounded insane, but we were desperate. We began sharing our stories, our regrets, our unfinished business. Mrs. Hargrove had never forgiven herself for the estrangement from her daughter. Mr. Peterson was haunted by the death of his wife, unable to let go of the guilt. My own unresolved conflict was a bitter argument with my brother, the last words we spoke before he died in a car accident. As Mr. Peterson spoke, a chilling realization dawned on me. I remembered the icy rain on the night of my brother's accident, the screeching tires, the deafening crash, and then nothing. No hospital, no recovery, just waking up on Mirror Lane. We were dead. I had died in that car crash with my brother. We decided to help each other, to resolve these conflicts. It was easier said than done. The reflections grew more intense, more chaotic. We saw visions of our pasts, our mistakes, our regrets, playing out in the mirrors and windows. It was as if the street itself was pushing us, urging us to confront our demons. Mrs. Hargrove was the first to move on. One evening, she wrote a long, heartfelt letter to her daughter. She poured out her regrets, her apologies, and her love. She left the letter in her daughter's old room, a place she had kept untouched for years. As she walked to the large mirror in her living room, she touched its surface and vanished. We never saw her again, but we knew her conflict was resolved. Mr. Peterson's breakthrough came when he burned his wife's old letters, the ones he had read over and over, clinging to his guilt. As the flames consumed the paper, his reflection in the window changed. He saw himself standing beside his wife, her hand in his, both of them smiling. He nodded to us, a silent farewell, and disappeared. I was the last. My brother's death had always weighed heavily on me. The argument we had was stupid, petty, but it was the last thing we ever said to each other. I couldn't forgive myself, but the reflections wouldn't let me hide. They showed me my brother, over and over, until I couldn't bear it anymore. One night, in the quiet of my home, I surrounded myself with his photographs and mementos. I spoke to him, my voice breaking with every word. I told him how deeply sorry I was, how much I missed him, how I wished I could take back those final hurtful words. As the tears flowed, I felt a warmth around me, as if he was there, listening. The air grew lighter, the weight on my chest finally lifting, and for the first time I felt a sense of peace. When I looked up, I saw my reflection in the hallway mirror. It was me, but different. I looked at peace. I reached out, touched the glass, and felt a warmth spread through me. The world faded, and I knew I was finally free. Mirror Lane still exists, a quiet street in a quiet town. New families move in, unaware of its dark past. But sometime, just sometimes, you might catch a glimpse of something in the mirrors, a shadow, a flicker of movement, a reminder of the souls who once lived there, trapped by their unresolved conflicts. And if you listen closely, you might hear their whispers, urging you to confront your own demons before it's too late. The summer heat was brutal, making the ground crack and everything dry up. Our small town, cut off from the rest of the world, was suffering under a terrible drought. The fields were empty, and the rivers had dried up. We were desperate, feeling like we were on the edge of disaster. That's when he showed up. I first saw the night gardener one evening, his outline standing out against the burning sky. He walked into town with just a small bag over his shoulder, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Word spread quickly. A man who said he could make plants grow overnight. We laughed at first, thinking he was just another fraud trying to take advantage of our bad luck. But when he came to the town square, something about him made us stop and listen. He spoke quietly, promising a harvest like we had never seen before. He didn't want any payment, just a place to stay and the freedom to do his work. When you're desperate, you'll believe in anything. We agreed, thinking we had nothing left to lose. That night, the night gardener went out into the fields. We watched from our windows, curious but doubtful. I saw him moving in the moonlight, his hands working over the dry soil. He seemed to be whispering to the ground, coaxing life from the earth. I fell asleep with his image in my mind, feeling a mix of hope and unease. The next morning, I woke up to shouts of amazement. Our fields had changed. Lush green plants stood tall, full of ripe fruits and vegetables. It seemed the drought had ended overnight. We gathered in disbelief, touching the leaves and tasting the fresh produce. The night gardener stood at the edge of the field, a small smile on his lips. We celebrated, our tables overflowing with the bounty. For the first time in months, laughter filled the streets. But as night fell, a strange silence took over. I went to bed with a full stomach and a heart full of hope, not knowing the darkness that was coming. That night, the nightmare started. I found myself in a twisted landscape, the plants from our fields growing wildly, their tendrils wrapping around me, pulling me into the earth. I woke up drenched in sweat, the vivid images lingering. I wasn't alone. The whole town had similar dreams, dark, scary, and disturbingly real. At first, we brushed it off, thinking it was just because of everything we had been through, but the nightmares kept coming, getting worse each night. Sleep became something we dreaded, and the town's joyful mood turned into collective anxiety. Faces grew pale and tired. Whispers began about the night gardener, about who he really was and the cost of our miraculous harvest. Driven by fear and curiosity, a group of us decided to confront him. We found him in the fields, tending to the plants under the moonlight. When we asked him for answers, he stayed calm, his eyes shining with an eerie light. "You wanted life," he said simply, his voice soft but haunting. "I gave it to you, but life and death are connected, and every gift has a cost." We realized the truth then. The night gardener was no ordinary man. He was a being who fed on fear and despair. The nightmares were his doing, a harvest of our deepest fears to fuel his power. The bountiful crops came from our suffering, each plant a piece of our darkest dreams. We tried to get rid of him, to break the curse we had brought on ourselves. But he was beyond our reach, a force we couldn't control. The fields, once a symbol of hope, became a reminder of our mistake. The crops kept growing, but we didn't touch them, afraid of the nightmares they brought. As days turned into weeks, our town began to wither again. The drought returned with a vengeance, as if nature itself was punishing us for what we had done. People left, looking for refuge elsewhere, their spirits broken. The night gardener disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving behind a field of twisted, thriving plants and a town haunted by its past. I stayed behind, unable to leave my home despite everything. I tended to the fields, trying to make peace with the land. The nightmares never left me, but I learned to live with them, to accept the darkness inside. Years passed, and the town became a shadow of what it once was. The night gardener is now a legend, a cautionary tale whispered among those who dare to listen. Some say he still roams, offering miracles to those desperate enough to take them. I don't know if that's true, but I do know one thing. The earth remembers, and so do we. I lived in an old house near the Gettysburg battlefield. The town's history whispered through its streets, and our home, with its creaking floors and weathered walls, seemed to hold onto the echoes of those who once lived there. It began quietly. In the middle of the night, as I lay in bed, I would hear someone call my name. It was a soft, almost pleading whisper that would wake me up, leaving me staring into the darkness, my heart pounding. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, the house settling, or maybe the wind. But the voice was persistent, always just on the edge of my consciousness, tugging at me with an eerie familiarity. One night, the whispering became unbearable. I woke up, the sound of my name hanging in the air. As I blinked away the sleep, my eyes adjusted to the dim light of my room. That's when I saw him, a small boy standing in the corner. He was dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged in a history book, a tattered shirt, breeches, and a cap that barely covered his messy hair. His eyes were wide and haunted, staring straight at me. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or scream. The boy didn't say anything. He just stood there, his presence as chilling as the winter air that seeped through the old windows. My guinea pigs, usually quiet at night, began to stir in their crate. They jumped and squeaked, their eyes wide with the same fear that gripped me. Their reaction confirmed what I was seeing was real, not just my imagination. For weeks, this became my nightly routine. The whispering would wake me, and the boy would be there, watching. I never spoke to him, and he never moved from his corner. During the day, the house seemed normal, almost comforting in its old charm. But as night fell, the atmosphere would change, thickening with an unseen presence that seemed to lurk in every shadow. I never told my parents about the boy. I was too scared they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they would. So I kept it to myself, the fear eating at me every night. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a recurring nightmare brought on by the spooky tales of Gettysburg's haunted past. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it. Years went by, and I eventually moved out of that old house. Life went on, and the memories of those terrifying nights began to fade, becoming nothing more than a ghost of the past. It wasn't until a family gathering years later that I finally brought it up. We were sitting around the dinner table, reminiscing about the old house. The conversation drifted towards the strange, unexplained events we had all experienced there. My mother mentioned hearing strange noises at night, and my father recalled the feeling of being watched. It was then that I decided to share my story. "I used to see a boy," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "He wore old-fashioned clothes, like from the Civil War. He would stand in the corner of my room and just watch me." The room fell silent, and my parents exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. My mother was the first to speak. "We saw him too," she admitted quietly. "We didn't want to scare you, so we never said anything. But he was always there, in the corner, just like you described." A shiver ran down my spine as the reality of their words sank in. We had all seen the same boy, experienced the same haunting presence. It wasn't just my imagination, it was real. We decided to find out more about the history of our house and the land it stood on, hoping to uncover the mystery behind our ghostly visitor. My father began asking around town, speaking with neighbors and local residents who might know something. During one of these conversations, he met a local historian who had dedicated years to studying the history of Gettysburg and its surroundings. The historian shed some light on our house's past, revealing that it had once been a makeshift hospital during the Battle of Gettysburg. Soldiers, both Union and Confederate, had been brought there, their bodies broken and their spirits weary. Many had died within those walls, their final moments filled with pain and fear. Intrigued and unsettled, we invited the historian over to share more details. As he spoke, he mentioned a particularly sad story about a young drummer boy who had been caught in the crossfire and brought to our house. The boy had died from his injuries, alone in a strange place far from home. The historian had found his name in an old ledger from the era, Samuel. The realization hit us hard. The boy we had seen was Samuel, his spirit trapped in the place where he had died. He had been reaching out to us, trying to find comfort or maybe a way to finally rest. We knew we had to help him. We arranged a small remembrance ceremony in our home, offering prayers and flowers in his memory. We asked for Samuel to find peace and move on from the place where he had suffered so much. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The whispering had stopped, and the boy was gone. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter with Samuel was just the beginning. The old house, with its dark history and lingering spirits, still held many secrets. And though Samuel had found his peace, I couldn't help but wonder how many more restless souls wandered its halls, waiting for someone to hear their whispers.